I used to believe that if I worked hard, stayed honest, and had talent, things would eventually fall into place. But life doesn't repay you with promises, and there's no room for naivety in a media company where pretty words often mask the sting of betrayal. My name is Sarah Cooper, once the youngest creative director at Evoke Media, a startup in Austin, Texas that specialized in emotional marketing campaigns for emerging brands. For me, Evoke wasn't just a job, it was home, a place where I believed lasting relationships were built on trust and effort. I joined in its first year, back when the office was still a rented basement beneath a coffee shop. There were only 4 of us then, and I was an unpaid intern who took the espresso machine in for maintenance and offered feedback on the logo. 4 years later, I stood before the entire company at our 5th anniversary, presenting a viral campaign that won us the award for Creative Strategy of the Year. The CEO mentioned me in his speech as the heart and brain of Evoke. I wasn't delusional, but I believed that was real. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building near South Congress. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of sunlight and had a small balcony where I often drafted briefs with a half-finished cup of cold coffee. I lived alone, but never felt lonely because the job consumed every second. Each morning began with a stream of messages from the design team, clients sending feedback at midnight, and coworkers pitching last-minute ideas while brushing their teeth. In a workplace where emotion was our weapon of choice, I learned to distill feelings into concepts and craft stories that made people buy things without knowing why. I loved my job. I thought I had finally found my true value here. Everything started to shift when Tyler arrived. He was a new operations director brought in from the parent company in Chicago. On the surface, he was warm, always shaking hands, often complimenting the team's youthfulness. But the way he looked at budget spreadsheets didn't suggest someone who came to nurture creativity. He often stressed terms like cost efficiency and labor optimization, words that sent chills down the creative department's spine. Still, I thought I could work with him, because I believed that as long as we delivered results, everything would be fine. The latest campaign I developed was for a skincare startup targeting women in their 30s, with the core message being treat your skin with honesty, paired with visuals of bare faces and emotional journals. I didn't just create the concept, I also built the customer engagement system, from chatbot to mood-based playlists. Laya, my friend and the lead producer, said to me, "Sarah, this might change emotional marketing forever." When the client approved it in just 3 days and sent an out-of-contract bonus, I thought to myself, this is the turning point. But right then, Tyler suggested I take a few days off to recharge, saying I'd been working too hard and needed to avoid burnout. I was suspicious but agreed, thinking he genuinely cared. I didn't expect that within the 4 days I spent in Denver with Narina, my college best friend. The entire campaign would be registered under Tyler and a new intern named Brielle when I returned. I saw the meeting room walls plastered with concepts in my fonts, mood boards I had chosen, but the credit read a breakthrough idea by the strategy team led by Tyler. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there, locking eyes with Laya, the only one too ashamed to look back at me, then walked straight into Tyler's office. He smiled, poured tea, and said, "I understand you're disappointed, but we're a team, and sometimes the company needs a narrative that's easier to tell than absolute fairness." I remember every word, every pause, and the way my hands slightly trembled on the cold wooden table. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I simply asked, "Did you just steal my work?" He didn't deny it. He just said, "If you want to go far, you have to understand that creativity is a team product. You were paid. That's enough." I left the conference room and opened my email, ready to draft a resignation, only to see that minutes earlier, HR had sent a message informing me of my new title as non-permanent strategic advisor, with a note saying it was to reduce creative pressure and create space for the next generation. Not technically a firing, but clearly an erasure. I don't remember how I made it home. I just remember the late afternoon light cutting across my living room window, making the old couch look emptier than ever. My phone rang. It was my mother, Maris, her voice sharp and impatient. "You quit again. Is this because of your ego? Don't blame them for not picking you. Maybe you just weren't enough." I wanted to hang up, but then she added, "Junior just got promoted at the law firm." He posted a photo on Facebook. I'm really proud of him. I closed the call and opened my laptop, determined to find the original drafts I wrote to prove my contribution, but my Google Drive access had already been revoked. Every file read, "Permission denied." I didn't cry. I just sat there, paralyzed, feeling something break inside me. It wasn't just my career. It was trust. I had believed that if I played fair, stayed genuine, and was good enough, I would be recognized. But all I got in return was betrayal, my name erased from my own work, comparisons from my own mother, and being pushed out of a place I once called home. I locked the balcony door, pulled the curtains, and for the first time, I seriously considered quitting the industry. Not because I was weak, but because I didn't know if my true value had any place left in a world where appearances and tactics always seemed to win. Everything I trusted, the company, my colleagues, my own mother, had chosen someone else over me, and I was left with a dead laptop, a cold cup of noodles, and one unread email from Narina that simply asked, "What gave them the right to do this to you at first?" I didn't have a plan. I simply turned off all notifications, deleted the work apps from my phone, and left my inbox as empty as an abandoned room. In the days that followed, I woke up without needing to prep slides, track engagement numbers, or meet a video deadline, but also without anyone needing me. I felt like I was drifting through still water, not sinking, but with no idea where I was headed. Narina showed up that Tuesday afternoon, carrying 2 bags of groceries. She didn't offer sympathy or ask soft questions. She opened the fridge, saw nothing but a bottle of water and a few expired jars of sauce, then started cooking. We sat in silence until she said, "I know you hate the phrase starting over, so call it untangling if that helps. Start with the tightest knot." I didn't respond, but I started thinking, maybe I didn't need to rebuild everything from scratch. Maybe I just needed to fix what had gone wrong. I reopened an old folder labeled Unsent Concepts, filled with ideas that had been dismissed for being too sensitive or off-trend. I read each draft, every headline, and realized that the most honest pieces I had written had never seen the light of day. They were silent, but not wrong, and maybe that was what gave them real value. I began documenting every step Tyler had taken to hijack the campaign, not to file a lawsuit, at least not yet, but to make sure I didn't forget. I built a timeline that included the date I submitted the concept, the emails confirming receipt, client feedback, and the exact moment the access permissions were changed. Laya, after several days of silence, finally messaged me, "Sarah, I'm sorry. They made me stay quiet. I was afraid of losing my job." I didn't blame her, but I also didn't respond right away. In a world where anyone could be replaced, silence had become a way to survive. But that same silence also made me want to do something no one could replicate. Each morning, I went to the public library, put in earbuds like I was taking an online course, but really I was reading market reports and case studies on emotional marketing. That's when I found a gap Evoke had never touched. Small brands without the budget for an agency, but with stories worth telling, They didn't need million-view videos. They needed someone who could understand their feelings and translate them into trust. I began writing a plan, not a formal pitch, just a long personal note broken into sections redefining purpose, choosing a target group, streamlining production, and using authenticity as the foundation for communication. I called it the Seedling Project because I knew I would be planting in very small soil. I went on Fiverr and hired a freelancer to build a simple website, just one page, a soft logo, and a sign-up form for free consultations. A week later, I posted the site on LinkedIn with a single line: "If you have a real story but don't know how to tell it, I'm here to listen." It didn't go viral. There weren't hundreds of shares. But 3 people messaged me: a preschool teacher who wanted to start emotional skills classes for kids, but was told she wasn't professional enough, a single mom making handmade organic soap, and a recent graduate who wanted to share her weight loss journey to inspire others. I called each of them, asked for every detail, then rewrote their stories with the same rhythm they used when speaking. No drama, no staging, just truth. I edited their videos using CapCut on my old laptop, recorded voiceovers on my phone, and gave them full control to post wherever they wanted. The following week, the preschool teacher's video was shared by a local parent group, just a few hundred views, but she messaged me. I got 4 new students and a trial class offer from a school. I wasn't sure if I was happier for her or for myself, but for the first time in months, I turned my notifications back on. Narina watched me film a tutorial on how to write emotional scripts. She smiled and said, "So, you're untangling the thread now." But just as that small joy started to grow, an email from my former company brought me to a halt. Brielle, the intern who had been credited in my place, had just been featured by Evoke's internal press as a game changer, the article said, with her sharp sense for emotional strategy. Brielle has opened a new path for startup marketing. I read it over and over, not out of jealousy, but because I felt erased from the record. No one mentioned Sarah Cooper, not even a single line to acknowledge that everything she had said that day became the foundation. I closed my laptop and stepped onto the balcony. The air wasn't cold, but the wind made my hands tremble as I held my coffee cup. Something gathered in my throat, not tears, but resolve. If they could rewrite the story, then I would tell it again, not with rage, but with results. But before that, I needed to relearn how to believe in myself, after all the days when belief itself had betrayed me. I didn't expect things to shift so quickly, but some moments in life don't announce their arrival, don't knock, they simply walk in and rearrange everything you thought was settled. That morning, I was editing a video for the single mother who made natural soap when I received a message from Jasmine, an old friend now working at a major branding agency in New York. The message was short. "Sarah, have you seen Evoke's slides? One part looks a lot like that old project of yours." Before I could respond, she sent an attachment, and when I opened it, I felt my chest tighten in a strange silence. It was a presentation for a new Evoke campaign, pitched to a fragrance brand looking to reach Gen Z. Slide 7 featured the exact concept I had shelved in my unsent folder, a campaign called The Scent of Memory, where each fragrance connects to an unspoken recollection, delving into buried personal emotions. The words, visuals, even the emotional pacing, it was all so identical, it couldn't be accidental. The credit below listed Brielle and Tyler as lead concept and strategy. I didn't know how they got it. Maybe from the time I left a USB behind in the office, or maybe they still had access to my old drive before it was revoked. But now, The method didn't matter as much as the certainty that they were still using what I had created, still polishing their image with my work. That evening, I called Jasmine, not to confront, but to ask for details. She said the fragrance brand had chosen Evoke because they were impressed by the emotional storytelling, but as she read through the proposal, it repeated too many elements I had once shared with her during a short consult. Jasmine didn't promise anything, but she said she would ask questions internally. I hung up and sat in the dim light of my living room, only the glow of the laptop screen on my face, making the space feel distant. I no longer felt the old kind of anger. What I felt was a cold clarity. I opened the folder where I had been compiling my records every draft. Timestamp, the moment an idea was first noted, and began comparing each element with Evoke's slides. I knew I wasn't the kind of person who chased lawsuits, but I also wasn't willing to let this pass like I had never existed. That night, I sent all the documents to Claire Rasmussen, an intellectual property lawyer Orson had recommended earlier. My email was brief. I don't want to make a scene, but I don't want them to keep going. Claire replied within an hour. We have a solid foundation to start. I'll need a comparison table with timestamps. I began working like I was preparing a pitch for a major client, but this time, that client was me. A week later, I received a surprise call from Verna, my distant aunt who rarely contacts me unless it's about family. Her voice was rushed. Your mother's worried because you posted something that hints at the old company. They say you should stay quiet, to protect your reputation. I didn't respond right away, just said, if people are afraid of the truth, they should question why. Verna paused for a few seconds, sighed, and said she just wanted peace, then hung up. I didn't mention any of this to Narina or Orson. I simply added a line in my notebook. They've started to feel afraid. That same week, the video I made for the young student was shared by a major podcast channel and unexpectedly made the top 10 inspirational content of the week. My inbox exploded. Someone messaged to say they never believed their story deserved to be heard until they saw that video. A small angel investor also emailed, requesting a meeting to discuss scaling the service. I said yes, but carefully. I didn't want to fall back into the old cycle, where things moved too fast and slipped out of control. But I also knew I couldn't stay on the sidelines forever if I truly wanted a comeback worth remembering. During a quiet conversation with Laya, she quietly mentioned that Tyler was now under internal investigation for some conflicts with partners and complaints about idea theft. She didn't go into detail, but advised me to keep all my evidence. I thanked her and asked, what about Brielle? Leia hesitated, then said, she's starting to panic. A few of your old clients found out the truth and don't want to work with her anymore. I didn't feel relief, but I recognized something important. That truth, when grounded enough, carves its own path. I hadn't gone public with anything yet, but the quiet work I had done, each case file, each video with proper credits, was beginning to unravel their control. I didn't need revenge. I just needed not to be silent anymore. The next morning, I received an email from a crowdfunding platform I had registered with back when planning the Seedling Project. They had selected me as one of 3 ventures to receive free media support for the month, along with an invitation to appear on a startup-focused talk show. I stared at the screen for a while, remembering the days when I thought I'd never want to speak in public again. Then I clicked accept, not to talk about who betrayed me, but to tell the story I had rebuilt from what others had dismissed as scrap. That night, I wrote my speech. No book quotes, no self-praise. I simply talked about the first clients, a preschool teacher, a single mom, a student without capital. I said, Emotional marketing doesn't require loud tears or blame. It just needs to touch what's real in the lives people are already living. After my third run-through, Orson walked in, looked at me for a moment, then said, "That's the first time I've seen you stand without shaking when you talk about yourself." I don't remember the exact moment I stepped out of that shadow, only that one morning, when sunlight slipped through the thin curtain and brushed across the scratched wooden table. I no longer saw myself as a victim. I saw someone who had survived, who had endured, who had been disappointed, but who was still here, still moving forward. That morning, I reopened my talk show presentation, deleted the typical modest opening, and wrote a new line. I was betrayed, sidelined, erased from the game, but I chose to stay, not to let them define how my story ends. I wrote it with a voice that didn't need to justify, didn't avoid, didn't name names, just the truth. I didn't need them to look back. I only needed to face it myself. 2 days later, I appeared live on a podcast hosted by Rachel, a former television reporter who had shifted into independent content. The session was recorded in a small studio on the east side of the city, a room lined with acoustic foam, the scent of raw wood and watered-down coffee hanging in the air. When the cameras rolled, Rachel looked at me and said, "Let's talk about the fall before the rise." I nodded, took a breath, and began. I spoke about the times I stayed silent out of fear of losing my job, about the moment I saw others celebrated for ideas I had created, about the ache of having my own mother not take my side. But I kept going, telling how one client cried when hearing their own story retold through a video I had made, about a folder on my laptop named the leftover corner that held feedback never acknowledged, and about the patience I didn't know I had to start again with nothing in my hands. I didn't need to cry, didn't raise my voice. Everything settled naturally into the listener through a silence I had been collecting for a year. When the session ended, Rachel said nothing at first. She stood, hugged me gently, and said, "People won't come to you because you tell stories well. They'll come because you tell them true." I didn't feel triumphant, just as though I had finally closed a door whose hinges had been loose for far too long. 3 days later, the emails came in steadily. A vegan beauty brand offered a collaboration to produce an inspirational video series. A creator platform invited me to write a storytelling tutorial series. I spent nearly the entire day sorting through responses, but while reviewing them, a message from Claire Rasmussen appeared. It was brief. "Evoke has reached out. They want to settle quietly." I read it several times, then called Claire for details. She said they were aware we had enough documentation and fearing damage to their brand. They were proposing an out-of-court solution. I asked, "Did they include an apology?" Claire chuckled softly. "No, just money and a non-disclosure clause." I didn't say yes. I told her to leave it for now, that I needed time to think. I wasn't refusing out of anger, but because I had realized this fight was no longer about reclaiming recognition. It was about protecting a principle. If I took the money and stayed silent, I'd be selling my story all over again. I had to stand, not for the past, but for the next person who might be erased from the credits like I once was. That evening, while cooking with Orson, my phone rang again. It was Laya. Her voice was low. "Tyler's been put on unpaid leave during an internal investigation. And Brielle, she just resigned." I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel grief. It was simply the collapse of an old order, like a wall built from borrowed bricks. Laya hesitated before asking, "If you ever start a company again, would you want us on board?" I didn't answer right away. I needed to be sure I wasn't building a new version of the same old cycle. But I knew it could happen, this time differently, from the beginning, on a foundation that didn't rely on deception. That night, I created a new file named Fieldhouse, a place for training, not for showing off results, but for building inner strength. I wanted to create a space for storytellers who didn't need permission to be visible. A week later, I accepted an interview with a local television channel when the host asked, "What does a true comeback mean to you?" I answered, "It's not about making them regret what they did. It's about reaching the point where you no longer need them to validate your worth." I knew that moment marked the break from the old ending and the beginning of something new. I no longer demanded justice in the way I once imagined. I didn't need them to pay in the way I had once planned. They were already walking their own dead-end path, and I was opening a new one, not dazzling, but wide enough for anyone to walk through, as long as they brought the truth with them. There were no standing ovations, no headline articles, no viral clips racking up millions of views. But on an early autumn morning, as I sat watering the plants on my balcony, my phone lit up with a notification saying that my podcast interview had been nominated as one of the 10 most inspiring stories of the year by a respected content platform. I looked at the screen, didn't smile, didn't hold my breath. I simply tapped the notification once, then went back to watering, watching the sunlight glint on the wet soil like scattered reflections. That was the moment I knew I had truly returned, not by reclaiming my old role or dragging anyone into the spotlight, but by letting results speak for themselves, by rebuilding my name with the very bricks I had salvaged from the wreckage. Over the next few months, I took on 7 more clients. None of them were major brands, but they all had one thing in common. They came to me because they felt lost in the noise, overshadowed by storytellers who were skilled but not sincere. I didn't make them cry. I simply helped them say the things they never thought would be important enough for a campaign. Somehow, that honesty created a deeper bond with their own customers. I officially launched Fieldhouse with a quiet gathering at a local cafe. No ribbon cutting, no media coverage, just Narina, Orson, Laya, and my first 2 clients seated around a long wooden table under the soft glow of amber lights and half-finished cups of tea. I presented the new logo, hand-lettered on a light brown background, and read out our slogan, "We don't create emotions, we keep them, just as they are." No one said much. They just nodded and signed the first collaboration agreement. The next day, I posted a photo with a simple caption, "Not a major win, but the right kind of beginning." The post received a few hundred likes, most from people I'd never met. Among them was a comment from Jasmine. "Just one line, I knew you wouldn't choose silence." I replied with a single emoji. Nothing more needed to be said. As for Evoke, I heard Tyler had left quietly, without ceremony. His LinkedIn now read, "Seeking new opportunities," and no longer mentioned any role related to creative leadership. Brielle had taken down all her posts about the campaign and rebranded herself as a freelance personal branding consultant. Rumor had it she lost most of her big contracts after a few clients started questioning the origin of her ideas. I didn't reach out to either of them. I didn't need to. Everything had begun to return to its rightful place, like water finding its path downhill. Maris, my mother, after months of silence, sent me a short voice message, no apology, just a line saying, "You're still choosing your own path. Huh, I hope it doesn't feel too lonely." I didn't reply. I just saved it to a folder I called Acknowledgements, where I kept things that once made me ache, but now only served as quiet proof that I had endured without smashing anything in return. At some point, I stopped seeing client conversations as work. They turned into shared reflections on real worth and quiet courage. One client told me that the video I made helped her understand why she had always felt not good enough, not because she lacked anything, but because she was playing by rules that were never hers. As she spoke, I saw a glimpse of myself from a year ago, sitting in a dark room, hands trembling as I stared at a post that gave someone else credit for my work. I had come a long way from there, not in a straight line, but through detours and quiet loops that no one saw. I no longer needed to prove anything to the world. I just wanted to stand somewhere bright enough that I no longer saw myself as a shadow. At the end of that year, I wrote a long blog post. I didn't name the company. I didn't list who did what wrong. I simply told the story of someone who had once been unofficially dismissed, who had lost faith in herself, but who had found her way back by doing what aligned with her truth. The piece spread across the creative community like a quiet story without drama, but with depth. One person commented, "I was sabotaged at my old job too, but I never dared to talk about it. Now I will." Another wrote, "Thank you for putting into words something I thought only I felt." I didn't reply to each one. I simply tagged them with a label called positive feedback in a private folder. On a cold evening, Orson asked, "If you could say one thing to your past self, what would it be?" I set down my tea and said, "Don't wait for recognition. Real value doesn't need permission to exist." I didn't write a memoir. I didn't launch a masterclass. I didn't turn pain into a brand. I just kept living in a way that felt worthy. I kept working with people who believed that emotion isn't a tool, it's a connection. And one ordinary day, while jotting down a line of copy for a new client, the sunlight spilled across my desk, and I squinted at its brightness. I put my pen down and thought, maybe success as revenge isn't about making people regret hurting you. Maybe it's about knowing that even after betrayal, you can come back, rebuild from broken bricks, and still look at the world with eyes that no longer burn.